Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I wanted to welcome you to today's event, which is Y90 Medical Isotopes Transforming Patient Experiences. Delighted for you, to those of you who were able to join us this morning for this CNIC event, our third of the year. And I believe most of you online either know myself or know about the CNIC, but I am the Executive Director of the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Company. We were formed in 2018 to advocate on behalf of the Canadian medical isotope ecosystem and educate and raise awareness about the role that medical isotopes play in our everyday life, transforming patient outcomes around the world, as well as the leadership role that the supply chain here in Canada plays in helping to fulfill that purpose. So today's event is, as I mentioned, about Y90. So the innovative work of Canada's isotope supply chain holds the potential for new and cost-effective options for cancer treatments, helping patients while reducing the burden on hospitals. Developed by Boston Scientific, the Yttrium-90 TheraSphere is used to treat liver cancer effectively and safely, providing hope to patients in Canada and around the world. TheraSphere offers patients fewer treatments, hospital stays, and side effects than other normal treatments. Medical isotopes like Y90 are transforming patient experiences, reducing hospital wait times, and reducing the financial and emotional burden on patients and families. We'll learn more about this product later from Dr. Wayne Mullet, but I have the pleasure right now of introducing a good friend of mine, and hopefully all of you are familiar with him. It's the Honorable Vic Fedeli, Minister of Economic Development, Job Creation, and Trade. The Honorable Vic Fedeli is a lifelong entrepreneur, successful business person, author, and philanthropist, and serves the Ford government as Minister of Economic Development, Job Creation, and Trade. His business experience led his firm, Fedeli Corporation, to be ranked 34th in the top 50 best places to work in Canada in 1989, and has also served 2 terms as the Mayor of North Bay. As Mayor, Vic focused on fiscal prudence, economic development, restoring hope, and restoring solvency to North Bay. Vic has been a long champion of the isotope sector, helping us secure 2 international trade missions that we held last year in November. So it's my pleasure to turn it over to Vic Fedeli for a few words.
Hi, everybody. Vic Fedeli here, Ontario's Minister of Economic Development, Job Creation, and Trade. On behalf of Premier Ford and the entire Ontario government, welcome to Y90 Medical Isotopes, Transforming Patient Experiences. Thank you to the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council for organizing this event to highlight the incredible work being done by our life sciences professionals. Ontario is home to the largest life sciences sector in Canada, employing more than 66,000 people. And that's something we're incredibly proud of and want to continue to nurture, which means supporting research and innovation. Now, over the past 2 years, we've seen nearly $3 billion in investments by global biomanufacturers. All of these investments have been made with confidence in Ontario, in our people, our 65,000 STEM grads, our life science ecosystem, and our history. Because Ontario has a long history of making life science medical breakthroughs. More than 70 years ago, cobalt-60 radiation was used as a cancer treatment for the very first time in London, Ontario. And just last fall, we celebrated a new partnership between Bruce Power, Isogen, and Saugeen Ojibwe Nation to distribute lutetium-177 to treat certain cancers and tumors. And we're excited about the work BWXT Medical is doing with Boston Scientific to provide innovative approaches to fighting liver cancer. And we know this is just the beginning. Medical innovation is in our DNA, and there's no doubt that we will continue to see exciting medical breakthroughs developed right here in our province. To that end, our government has released phase 1 of taking life sciences to the next level. It's Ontario's first life sciences strategy in over a decade. This strategy represents an all-of-government approach to supporting Ontario's vibrant life sciences sector while building on the sector's success. We plan to grow Ontario's biomanufacturing and life sciences sector by 25% over the next decade and double venture capital investment in the sector to $750 million by 2030. Together, we're ensuring that Ontario remains at the forefront of life sciences innovation and continues to be a global leader in life sciences. So thank you to everyone at the CNIC for your hard work and dedication to improving the lives of people in Ontario and around the world. Best wishes for a successful and productive event.
Thank you very much, Minister. Always appreciate your support for the CNIC and working with you and your team at the Ministry of Economic Development and Trade. Next up, I'm going to introduce our first speaker for the event, Dr. Wayne Mullett, who is the Global Director of Supply and Development at Boston Scientific. Wayne is going to provide us a presentation about the Y90 supply chain, its development, and its role in Ontario. Dr. Wayne Mullett transitioned to Boston Scientific from Nordion, where he spent 9 years as Director, Radiopharmaceutical Development, overseeing Nordion's R&D pipeline and providing technical support for commercial radiopharmaceutical products. Prior to joining Nordion and Boston Scientific, he was a project team leader at Merck, managing multidisciplinary teams that were responsible for the advancements of drug substance product candidates from discovery to phase 2 proof of concept studies. Wayne holds a Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry from Memorial University in Newfoundland and a PhD in Bioanalytical Chemistry from Carleton University. Wayne, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Andrew. Very happy to be here today to talk a little bit more about this product and technology. Before I jump in, I did want to thank our panelists as well. So Dr. Majumdar, Dr. Amaral for their contributions, and the Honorable Mr. Federelli as well for his comments. So what I'd like to cover today is a very interesting medical device technology known as TheraSphere, as Andrew mentioned. It's a radioactive microsphere, which is used to treat liver cancer patients. It's actually manufactured right here in Ontario and used to treat Canadians and liver cancer patients in 30 other countries around the world. So I want to share with you a little bit about an overview of this technology, the product, the disease state, talk a little bit about the health economics of the product, and also some future indications and opportunities we have with the TheraSphere product. I will also talk a little bit about how we actually make the product right here in Ontario, because we have a very interesting opportunity for some economic benefits to the province based on our motivation to have a completely made in Canada supply chain. So just moving on, give you a little bit of I think I may be missing a slide there, but just a little bit of an overview about some statistics for liver cancer. I was able to get some data from the Canadian Cancer Society. And last year in 2022, there was about 3,000, or a little over closer to 3,500 patients who were diagnosed with liver cancer. The more sobering statistic is that of that 3,500, about half of those individuals will succumb to the disease. There's a disproportionate number of men to the women that are diagnosed with liver cancer, and the primary causes of liver cancer are most commonly hepatitis and cirrhosis of the liver through alcohol abuse. And I'm sure Dr. Amaral and Dr. Majumdar can tell you a bit more about the causes of liver cancer. But we do see, in terms of long-term prognosis of liver cancer, is quite poor, with only about 16% median survival past 5 years. So there's definitely an unmet medical need and treatment options that are required to help those liver cancer patients. So what are the current approaches for liver cancer treatment right now? Well, as in the case with most any disease, cancer disease, surgical resection is the gold standard, but often is the case with these liver tumors that's not a viable option because of the infiltrative nature of the tumors themselves. Liver transplantation is another option, but there's not an infinite number of organs available. And sometimes, unfortunately, when patients are diagnosed with liver cancer, they're too far gone to be able to be eligible for a transplant. You can use ablation technologies, things like microwave using heat, or cryoablation using cold to try and freeze or burn the tumor and kill it. But that's also limited in terms of its ability to kill larger tumors. Everyone's probably well aware of using systemic chemotherapy, but there's a lot of adverse and side effects associated when you basically systemically administer such a toxic drug and bathe the body in such a toxic drug. So the idea around trying to improve cancer treatments is really to find ways to do that much more selectively. And one of those ways that you can do it is a technique called Transarterial chemoembolization, where you're much more selective in the way that you deliver the chemotherapeutic agent. Or in the case of using radiation, be it external beam or SBRT, or the technique that I'll talk about, which is Transarterial radioembolization. So there's a great opportunity here to be able to do that to use radiation in a much more selectively way to kill the tumor but spare the normal tissue surrounding it. So why do we look at using radiation? Well, I think most people are familiar that radiation has been used very commonly to treat in the treatment of oncology. And in fact, ever since radiation was discovered, it has been identified and used to be able to treat the disease. And the way that it actually does that is it uses the high energy ionizing particles from those radioisotopes to be able to cleave or chop up the DNA strands. And if that high ionizing energy can cleave the DNA more than the cell can repair it, we have an opportunity to shut down cellular replication. So that's the way that radiation is used to be able to treat oncology. There's different ways of doing that. I talked a little bit about external beam before, but the limitation there is that you're passing radiation from the outside into the tumor, and there's a lot of collateral damage on the way. We can also use systemic therapy, where you take a radioisotope, you label that onto an agent like an antibody, and that selectively finds the tumor cell. And that can work well, but you require that antibody and a cellular target to be able to treat that specific type of cancer. The way that actual TheraSphere works in this transarterial radioembolization disease is that you use a radiation source. In this case, it's a highly radioactive glass microsphere that can be selectively deposited inside the tumor. And here's a little diagram of the way that actually works. So the actual TheraSphere particles themselves are these glass microspheres. Here's a scanning electron micrograph showing the size and shape of those microspheres relative to a human hair. So in the case of this treatment technique, these highly radioactive glass microspheres have the appropriate size and shape that they can be delivered directly inside a liver tumor via a feeding vessel or artery. One of the hallmarks of liver cancer is that they have a high amount of blood flow feeding from the arterial system. And very skilled interventional radiologists like Dr. Majumdar and Dr. Amaral are able to use a catheter and exploit one of those feeding vessels, almost like a highway, to be able to very selectively deposit these radioactive microspheres inside the tumor to be able to control the cellular replication of those cancer cells. So this product was actually approved by Health Canada all the way back in 1991 and has been used to treat Canadian patients. So on my next graph, here's a little bit of a cartoon to show the way that that product actually works, where an interventional radiologist would identify one of those feeding vessels and to be able to deliver those highly radioactive glass microspheres selectively inside that tumor. So how do we actually make the product? Is we leverage these glass microspheres, and we have to place those inside of a nuclear reactor to be activated. They start off their life as just a cold glass microsphere with really no potency, and they only become radioactive once placed in a reactor. But what's very critical about that time point is the moment they're placed into a reactor, based on the half-life of the isotope that we're generating, in this case yttrium-90, we're effectively on a clock to be able to ensure that we put it into the reactor long enough, get it delivered to the dispensing facility, which is here in BWXT, and then have that shipped out and delivered to the hospital at the appropriate time to be able to treat that liver cancer patient. And we actually time these treatments based on the half-life and the amount of activity that's required to treat the cancer patient. We're timing these treatments down to the exact day and the hour. So we have a really great opportunity in working with some of the Ontario power reactors to be able to shorten that supply chain. And one of the opportunities that we're actually looking at is using companies such as Laurentis, who's partnered with OPG, or potentially Isogen, which is part of Bruce Power, who have developed delivery technologies to be able to introduce these glass microspheres into the reactor to be able to activate them. And of course, this would dramatically shorten the time that it would take to get these radioactive microspheres to our dispensing facility at BWXT in Ottawa and then out to the eventual patient. So this is a really great opportunity here to be able to have this made in Ontario supply chain and have this product made in Ontario for Canadians and other individuals, liver cancer patients around the world. To that point, wanted to cover a little bit of the clinical data that we have been able to achieve with the TheraSphere product. So I talked about in some of the earlier slides the typical prognosis that a liver cancer patient would have. With the use of TheraSphere, depending on which stage of the disease that the patient is diagnosed at and receives the TheraSphere treatment, depending on the type of a procedure that they receive with the TheraSphere product, we have been able to extend the median overall survival of patients up to 12.5 years when you look at using the product and downstaging the disease either to surgery or transplantation. So you can see some very powerful clinical performance of the TheraSphere product depending on how it's actually used. One of the other things that I wanted to talk about, and everybody well appreciates, that the healthcare system, especially in Canada, is under considerable amount of economic strain right now. And when you look at the price point for some of these cancer treatments, they can appear on the face value to be quite expensive. But when you, in this graph here, when you compare TheraSphere to another competitive treatment modality, transarterial chemoembolization for the treatment of liver cancer patients, because of the fact that TheraSphere, in terms of the majority of patients, almost 100% of patients can be treated in either 1 or 2 sessions, is very cost effective from the perspective that you don't have to bring those patients back into the hospital multiple times. There's also a much lower adverse event profile associated with it, much less time taken up in hospital beds, because you're effectively able to treat this disease in either a single or a double setting. When you also compare this technology to some of the other types of external beam radiations, there's some statistics here which show the difference between, and I think this may be some US data, but certainly applies as well to Canada. We are looking at the difference between $200,000 for external beam versus about $17,000 for yttrium-90. So there's definitely a health economic benefit associated with this product to help alleviate some of that financial strain which is on our healthcare system at the moment. So we've been able to show a lot of promising results with the use of this product to treat liver cancer patients in Ontario and Canada and in over 30 different countries worldwide. We're also looking at exploiting this technology for other types of cancers. So right now we're looking at lung cancer, prostate cancer, and I think one of the ones which is certainly more exciting is the use of this product to treat glioblastoma or brain tumors. And in our partnership with Johns Hopkins University, we actually had kicked off some preclinical work and were able to successfully treat 5 dogs who came in with glioblastoma. And the results were quite promising. These dogs actually survived the administration. The disease was under control, and they were actually returned to their actual owners. So some very encouraging results to be able to extrapolate all the work that we've done in the liver with this product into new types of cancers, such as glioblastoma or prostate. And actually, just that's all I had, but just in quick summary, here it is, the slide, thank you. Just want to hope you have a better appreciation of what this device is, how it actually works, some of the clinical utility that we've been able to see for the treatment of liver cancer patients. And also, I think a very exciting opportunity here is to be able to work with some of the power reactors in Ontario to activate this material and have this made in Ontario supply chain that would bring both economic benefits to the province and to the healthcare system overall. So I think that's about it for me. Andrew, I think it's over to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Wayne. Really appreciate the information, specifically, obviously, on the economic impact that you guys are playing here in Ontario. Everyone, I know you probably have tons of questions for Wayne, but we have a really exciting panel coming up. So If you can hold off your questions till the end, there will be an opportunity to relay them to Wayne through myself and the CNIC. So we will certainly open up an opportunity for that. It's now my pleasure to turn the conversation over to our moderator and our panelists. Our panel, Improving Patient Access and Reducing Hospital Wait Times. A moderator for this panel is Ken Spears. Ken is the General Manager and Vice President of Boston Scientific. He is the past member of the MedTech Board of Directors Executive, the Mars Excite Management Board of Directors, the Mississauga Life Sciences Consortium, and an active life sciences contributor to the Brampton Innovation District. He is joined by Dr. Ricardo Amaral. Dr. Ricardo Amaral is a vascular and interventional radiologist from the University of Montreal. He completed his radiology residency in Brazil at the Federal University of Health Sciences of Porto Alegre in 2017. He also completed a 2-year interventional radiology fellowship at the University of Montreal and a 1-year interventional radiology with a focus on interventional oncology at Centre Hospital Université Vadou in Switzerland. I butchered that, absolutely. The final member of our panel is Dr. Amal Majumdar. He is the Division Head of Vascular and Interventional Radiology at London Health Sciences Centre and St. Joseph's Healthcare, and Associate Professor of Radiology, Oncology, and Medical Biophysics at Western University in London. And over to you, Ken, and welcome to our panelists and the physicians. Thank you very much for joining us today. I know you guys have a very busy schedule, so really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Big thank you to Dr. Wayne Mullett for setting the table for our Y90 conversation today, and Andrew for the kind introductions. So for the remainder of our time this morning, I'm really excited that we've got 2 interventional oncology radiologists to our esteemed panel, and to bring an informed opinion of what Y90 innovation means to physician care providers and to liver cancer patients in Canada. Dr. Majumdar and Dr. Amaral, welcome to our panel, and thank you for taking the time away from your busy practices. I see you're still in your greens. We're taking time away from you and your practice treating patients, of course. So very much appreciated that you joined our discussion this morning. The first thing that our audience may want to know is, what types of cancers do you treat? And what types of cancer treatments do interventional oncology radiologists administer? Dr. Majumdar, perhaps I can ask you to get us started this morning. And
he's mute.
While we're working that through, Dr. Amaral, perhaps we can pass the question on to you.
Yeah, perfect. Actually, we treat basically every single cancer outside brain, which is basically a neurointerventional or neurosurgery field. And we use several different methods, including, endovascular methods, or radioembolization or chemoembolization, but as well as destructive percutaneous methods when we use needles to either freeze the tumors or heat the tissue. And one thing that we should bear in mind, those methods are minimally invasive, but they are not actually minimally aggressive. So actually want to treat patients the best way possible and being as good as surgery. So this is the ultimate goal. And with some tools, we're able to reach that. Some difficult tumors that cannot be operated on, that we just treat in this way. So it's a very diverse field, actually, and we have several tools to help us, and including of course radioembolization.
Thank you, Dr. Amaral. Appreciate the thoughts. It's a great way to start us off this morning. Dr. Majumdar, have we fixed your audio issues?
Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Excellent. Sorry about that. That's a terrible way to start a conference. I was just actually saying that I was thank you guys for inviting me to this. As a cancer treatment is very close to my my heart, and I love opportunities to talk about it. So just as a quick, brief overview in terms of interventional radiology, interventional oncology. The big joke is, does your mother know what you do for a living, right? And it can be a bit complex. Basically, radiologists are the doctors that would read imaging, and interventional radiologists are doctors that use diagnostic imaging, such as x-rays, ultrasound, CAT scans, to do all kinds of different procedures in the body. And some of us will specialize in cancer therapies, where we will do different therapies, some of which Wayne had alluded to in his talk, where we may use a needle to kind of skewer tumors and heat or cool them, different tumors in the liver, kidneys, lungs, or outside of those places. Or we would go through the blood vessels, through the arteries, to deliver things like chemotherapy or just bland particles to kind of choke and kill tumors that way. Or in the case of Y90, to go through the blood vessels to get into those little blood vessels of the liver with our little catheters and guide wires, using live x-rays to guide us, and deliver these tiny radiation seeds that will deliver Y90 or very high dose radiation to tumors. That's kind of a bit of an overview. Something very common that we do in interventional oncology is something as simple as a biopsy, right? Taking a piece of tissue to establish that diagnosis. So we're certainly involved in the cancer patient's journey at different points of their treatment or journey in general.
Thank you, Dr. Majumdar. Appreciate that. So we've got a bit of a foundation for our conversation this morning. So I'm going to launch into the next question. So I'll ask Drs. Amaral and Majumdar to share their insights into liver cancer patient prognosis, the available treatment options, and the benefits of Y90 to both patients and the healthcare system. So Dr. Amaral, perhaps I'll start with you. And in your response, can you touch on the Y90 long-term outcomes data and the Y90 inpatient versus outpatient health system considerations?
That's a really interesting question, actually, because when I think about Y90, we should think long term. That's the main goal, because Y90 will give us better results for specific patients in the long run, and that's what we're seeking for our patients. We do one effective treatment that will last, and this effective treatment, the main advantage that it can be done as an outpatient treatment. So it's not a secret that we have sometimes a hard time fighting beds for our patients. For some other treatments, that will be, not saying alternative, but that will be the standard that we're delivering so far. And sometimes we just can't deliver the treatments because we don't have the availability. And it's not something only in Quebec, it's a worldwide issue. In Switzerland, in Brazil, it's the same thing. We have difficulty getting the patients into the hospital and having an inpatient. So that would be one of the main advantages of this method: long-term outcomes, and of course the possibility of just having a patient coming in the morning, doing the procedure, and leaving at the end of the day. And as Dr. Mullet spoke before, actually we're reaching a point that we can do just one session. We can do the planning in the morning, treatment in the afternoon, patient visits in the same day. So instead of two visits, one visit to the hospital, everything's done. We're not there yet, but I think it might be the future of this kind of treatment.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dr. Amaral. We're starting to understand this space and the complexities in this space a lot more. And on that note, Dr. Majumdar, I wonder if you could incorporate any additional thoughts to this question, perhaps related to the multidisciplinary processes used for Y90 patient selection. And if you had any additional comments, it would be appreciated if you were to make a few of those comments on patient tolerance to Y90.
Sure. Yeah, so much like I think cancer care has evolved in Canada and worldwide to become very much a multidisciplinary kind of programs or teams, that we work as part of these multidisciplinary teams and sort of put the patient at the center. And, we will come as a group, whether it's interventional radiologists and oncologists like ourselves, medical oncologists, radiation oncologists, surgeons, and we all kind of will figure out what do we all bring to the table, and based on the literature, scientific evidence, based on our local expertise and our clinical practices, then what's the best outcome for that patient. And I would say in 2023, it's not very common now that people are getting just one therapy. a lot of times we're sequencing different therapies, and Y90 has definitely has a role in that regard, depending on what type of cancer we're talking about. But that multidisciplinary aspect is very important. We know that it actually improves outcomes for patients. It provides the best options for the patients, and that's ultimately what we want, right? We want that patient to have kind of that good communication between specialists going forward. In terms of side effect profile and things like that, I would say Y90 has some inherent advantages over our local standard previously was chemoembolization, where we would snake our way through the blood vessels and mix up that chemotherapy mixture and inject it. Those patients we generally have to admit to hospital. We have to kind of pre-medicate them in advance to anticipate some of those side effects that they get. And they will not uncommonly have some side effects and require, 2 to 3 days in hospital. Whereas with Y90, one of the big advantages, and we really saw that especially during COVID, is the fact that we can treat people as outpatients. So we can bring them in, and if we are, still doing these sort of separate appointments, but bring them as an outpatient for their quote unquote mapping procedure, and then a week or two later bring them back for their therapy procedure once we figured out that optimal dose of radiation. And generally speaking, afterwards, I would say most of the patients do quite well. For sure, there are some mild side effects that can occur, but some of them will tell me, you know what, if you didn't tell me, doc, I wouldn't know you did anything to me. And a lot of that will depend on what type of tumor we're treating, what type of patient we're treating. But that's a really good feeling that we can treat someone effectively with a really good side effect profile. And that's something that also needs to be considered in our Canadian system, not just costs of things, but the quality of life and how people, the side effect profile of different therapies. So even though one therapy may be quote unquote cheaper, the fact that you're hospitalizing them for longer, those things need to be factored into the calculus, as well as that side effect profile. If something is as effective or more effective and better side effect profile, that is an important consideration.
Thank you, Dr. Majumdar. I appreciate that. Dr. Arnold, clearly there's a lot of patient considerations in making these complex decisions on how best to treat liver cancer patients and optimize their outcomes. So moving on to the next question. This question actually has two parts. So the first part, I'll ask both physicians, in your professional experience, how does patient access to Y90 vary depending on where you live within Canada or perhaps other countries? And the second part of the question is, what would you like to see in the future? And do we have opportunities in this country to provide better access to Y90 for Canadian patients living with liver cancer? Perhaps, Dr. Majumdar, if I could turn it back over to you to get us started on this question.
Sure. Certainly, access in Canada is quite variable from province to province. So there are some provinces that were sort of the early adopters of Y90 and had provincial models where it was funded for certain types of cancers. I would say BC was likely the first one, Alberta being the second, and with some kind of smattering of provinces in Atlantic Canada as well. But the access was fairly scant. For people in the prairies, largely they would have to go to Alberta to access this in very certain and specific instances. So there was certainly not a uniform access across Canada. We advocated very hard in Ontario, and I would say in Ontario it's largely a success story actually, that the government listened and ultimately we were able to develop a provincial based funding model through Cancer Care Ontario that led to funding for very, very specific indications that I was integrally involved in with one of my colleagues from the University of Toronto, and that's just absolutely transformed our praxis and access to Y90. Even in Ontario right now, it's a bit limited. It's only at 3 centers, and that will expand. So I'm part of that process as well with Cancer Care Ontario. So that way, I do applaud the efforts in Ontario, and I think actually it may be the model to look at nationally that other provinces could look at, and really we hope the next big domino would be Quebec, because obviously Ontario and Quebec being the two kind of largest populations in Canada, and a bit unfortunate that now that we've improved access in Ontario, we would really want to flip that domino in Quebec as well. and really in the rest of Canada ultimately. But I think if Ontario and Quebec were to develop this type of model, it would be harder to fight in other provinces. So and so that we've done well, and where I think we could do even better is recognizing, there are other cancers that are a little bit orphaned, things like bile duct cancer or cholangiocarcinoma, where there's a lot of research going in that Y90 has a large role, and metastatic breast cancer, which is not common to see women that have liver dominant metastases from breast cancer, but there is that patient population that exists that we could absolutely serve very well with Y90 in conjunction with whatever systemic therapies are on.
Fantastic. I appreciate that, Dr. Majumdar, not only for the care and attention that you and the stakeholders that treat patients take in the planning, but also in this other question of providing patients with better, more responsible access to these innovative treatments. So I appreciate you taking us and sharing some insight into that journey. I may call on you again before we break away today to provide a little bit of the details on how we go about doing that based on the momentum that you've created in the province of Ontario. But before we do that, I want to turn it over to Dr. Amaral and get his perspective on any additional thoughts, Dr. Amaral, on patient access to Y90. You work inside of the Quebec environment. You did mention Switzerland. You mentioned Brazil earlier in the commentary today. Any thoughts on access question there, and maybe additional thoughts on Y90 and the health system economics associated with Y90 in these various systems?
Well, first things, I like to say we will pretty much like to be the next piece of the domino, because we have every single week patients coming into our multidisciplinary team discussions that would benefit of this. So this is one thing. We have some limited access here in the center we work. Unfortunately, the program didn't start yet. There's a lot of effort with the direction. Everyone's doing their part. We're trying, and we're gonna get there. But unfortunately, in this center specifically, that we treat more than half of the liver cancers in Quebec, we don't have access. So we send those patients to peripheral centers. About Switzerland, well, it was a pretty good system in this regard. Patients would have free access for the let's say really in-base and proven by literature indications. So this access will be free. Otherwise, for more specific cases, we will discuss in a multidisciplinary team, and those patients will get access if approved by this team. In Brazil, interesting enough, last year, well, in my country, we're a little bit poor, but last year, the National Agency of Supplementary Health approved Y90 for well, those indications that are really proven by literature, because there's no doubt that it works, and long-term run, it is beneficial for the system, because we might think that it is an expensive treatment if you're going to check just the cost of delivering the drug or the dose. But long-term run, and been proven, we have a literature review from Spain this year, bringing several other papers together, showing that long-term run is less expensive than the other techniques. And it's interesting enough, the only thing that had more costs in many studies, cost-effectiveness studies, was surgery. So that's because those patients get surgery, and that's a big plus. So surgery means better quality of life and better outcomes long-term run. So I think that covers a little bit, and I hope to get really hope to get the opportunity to treat those patients, because every single week we have physicians in the committee asking for it. Specific situations, patients that will clearly benefit, and we're just missing this tool. It's an important tool, and we want to be like Ontario and want to be able to deliver it to our patients.
Well said. No, I appreciate the thoughts. Before I leave this topic, and I think it's a really interesting topic, I may ask just another for some other brief comments. I'll come back to you, Dr. Majumdar, if you trace back on your journey, and I know you've been at it for a long time, you mentioned that it should feel pretty good. You've accomplished a lot along with the Ontario stakeholders, and there's a number of them. What would you say are the primary turning points that have provided momentum from where you were versus where we are today in allowing and enabling patient access to Y90?
We had a terrible program, but at the same time it led to this, as we had a self-pay program in our hospital for Y90. And that was not unlike other cancer therapies, that if you wanted a cancer therapy outside of quote unquote the standard of care of what the province would provide, there was an avenue for patients to pay in certain regards. And so we had established that, with some, trepidation, but we did it regardless, to be able to provide Y90. And the company we're working with, this was prior to Boston Scientific owning the company, and then a little bit while Boston Scientific owned the company, was a bit generous in a sense to provide us with the, quote unquote free doses of Y90 to kind of really keep this fledgling program alive. And to be honest, I had all my patients contact their MPPs, and myself continue to advocate, and it did catch the attention of Cancer Care Ontario as an entity, and also, as my committee work with Cancer Care Ontario was very strong in advocating for Y90, and I do think that had a big influence. We also did some media type of work and awareness work to different stakeholders. We created some videos and some press releases about Y90, and a lot of that was very helpful. But also the data in the scientific literature continued to advance, and more evidence continued to evolve. That really it just became very difficult to argue that we cannot have this therapy as an option for patients. And I think it's very difficult in 2023 to have a liver center of excellence and not offer Y90. So I think we're at a place where hopefully now in Quebec it will be much easier to convince stakeholders, especially even jokingly we can always say, hey, Ontario's doing it, and ignite those provincial kind of rivalries, right? But I think the medical evidence is there. We have lots of experience in Canada, but I do think those kind of, I don't know if there's one turning point, but there were sort of multiple things that sort of pushed us ahead, and I was very happy. In fact, we almost wanted to pitch a pilot project, but at that point they sort of said, well, instead of the pilot project, we think we have an opportunity to fund Y90, and they engaged with myself and kind of there's only a few of us that were sort of quote unquote experts that they engaged with, and we were able to set those standards. And even now we're continuing to set the standards to allow that to disseminate more provincially, to improve that access that's good in Ontario, but it can absolutely be better.
Appreciate that. That's fantastic. So thank you for fighting the good fight on behalf of Canadian patients. As we'll learn in a few moments, this is really, really important and a great conversation. Dr. Amaral, real quick before I leave this, you mentioned data, and Dr. Majumdar has mentioned data. I know in Canadian health system, we pride ourselves in making data-based decisions to inform the treatment options that we provide for patients. Can you maybe talk a little bit about the data reference that you just made in your previous comment? I guess Spanish data, and does that type of data open up, or should it open up broader conversations in Canada to inform health systems on this methodology, treatment modality, and that should be available to more patients in Canada and Quebec?
I truly believe so, and that's what's been done. Actually, every single center does a review of all the data that's been going on the last few years. And as I mentioned, specifically the last few years, we had a big amount of new studies that came up showing which are the best patients to treat and how we should treat them. And in this way, we have better results translating in less cost long term. So yes, those papers, those reviews, those studies, they are being used to formulate consensus inside the center and recommendation. So I think we should profit of this wave of literature and heavyweight data that we have, and make the next step. it would be a great advantage for these patients. We know which patients to treat. We know how to. We know it's worthwhile, and we just need to treat them.
Outstanding conversation. Again, I appreciate it. Regretfully, I have to move on to the next question. I think we could spend a lot of time on this one, but I think we hit that pretty well, and I appreciate the comments from our physician panelists. Next question, really, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Majumdar. As we wind down our time together, can you share a patient's story with our audience where a Y90 treatment resulted in a positive outcome for a Canadian liver cancer patient and their family? Dr. Majumdar.
Sure. And to that point, really, this is the kind of, these patients are what keeps us going, right? For Dr. Amaral, myself, and, this is why we're here, right? We're here to help patients. And, we have many patients that do well, but really one that comes to mind was this, young woman in her early 30s who basically had a massive liver cancer. So she had kind of hepatitis B unbeknownst to her, that she had passed, or inherited from her mother during in pregnancy or in utero. It can be transferred from a mother to a fetus. So she sort of went living through her life not knowing that she was a hepatitis B carrier, and developed like this huge mass in her liver that was completely silent, completely asymptomatic. But she went in for an ultrasound to look at her baby. And while they were ultrasounding her baby, they saw this big tumor in her liver, which you could imagine how traumatic that would be to that person, right? You're going in with such a joyous moment to find out such terrible news. And so she was, discussed in our we call it a tumor board, but it's really a multidisciplinary cancer conference. And her tumor was quite big, so it was beyond what we could. The best treatment option we have is to transplant that patient. That's the best long-term outcome for that patient. But she was beyond any criteria for transplant, and her tumor had showed signs of an aggressive tumor. It was secreting a protein that we say abnormal is 200, and hers was about 34,000. So it was an aggressive, nasty tumor. But we decided to do Y90 to try to, we call it downstage, right? Shrink it as much as possible. And hey, it's a bit of a Hail Mary. Let's see if we can get her to transplant. So we did 2 Y90 sessions on her. And she was, she had this young family, terrified young husband. I'll never forget them in their first consultation. They were just so nervous that they were very silent throughout the whole thing. I think the news had sort of rocked them. But we were able to treat them twice. Her tumor melted away magically, and we were able to bring her into the realm of liver transplant. So this is where we're part of a team. So I did my role. I felt very good about what I did. And then my liver surgeon colleagues and my hepatology colleagues were able to bring her to transplant, in which she underwent a very successful transplant, managed her, followed her post-op, and she's been doing great. She's about, I think, 3 or 4 years out of liver transplantation now. She's young, with this young family, young children, and able to live her life happily. And that, if we would have left that unchecked, I based on the literature, she would have passed away within the year. So that to me is the kind of case that keeps me going, and that really shows the amazing transformative, effects of Y90. And that's something, that we want to really emphasize to the stakeholders, that this is it. I could not achieve that with doing the old way with chemoembolization. I don't think, I just would think it's impossible to do that with a pill or an IV medication. So this is just an amazing technology that I would not have been able to achieve that any other way than the way it happened. So that's the one that for me that really sticks out.
Thank you, Dr. Majumdar. I'm sure those of us who just heard this patient account will never forget this. I know that for those of us who are parents, we can put ourselves in that situation and understand the dire emotions that not only the patient would be going through, but the family. And thank you for bringing up the family as well. Very oftentimes when we talk about treatment and treatment options and innovations, we don't talk about the family. But in this case, you mentioned the family, and I would imagine the family was going through a tremendous burden And what a relief for all involved. I love the story, and I'm sure the audience appreciated that as well. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to perhaps transition from that, Dr. Majumdar, and to Dr. Amaral. Dr. Amaral, I guess, as we near the end of our time together again this morning, any final thoughts to conclude our Y90 conversation this morning as it relates to Y90 and patient access to Y90, and who should be treated versus who shouldn't be?
Well, this was a very touching case from Dr. Bujonder, and we see it that in skilled hands, these treatments might be magical. And another thing that we should bear in mind that Y90 is not specifically for those 1 in a million treatments. We have everyday patients that come to the clinic that would benefit of it. Every single week, we have several patients discussed in the tumor boards and multidisciplinary team boards that would benefit of it. It's a tool that, well, when having be employed as it should, gives better outcomes and gives life years for those patients. This patient that Dr. Majumdar told us, is a patient that had a really bad prognosis, and she's 3 years into her disease, and she's alive. So when we select patients and we treat them as we should, with the proper tools, and Y90 is a proper tool for specific patients, we give them years of life, and the cost of it is immeasurable. You cannot put a price on it. And if you want, you can put a price on it and compare to the other therapies, and it's been proven that is worthwhile. So once again, actually, I would just like to thank you all for bringing this conversation up. We know that, it's well proven, solid therapy, TheraSphere study just came out, cost-effective studies, Spain and Italian study came out. So we have the literature, we have the means, we have a national product, and then we have the will, and I think everyone's doing their part. Thanks once again, the population's doing their part. I guess politicians are well aware now of the needs of this treatment, pharmaceutics as well, and inside the hospitals, we are doing our part. We're doing our part in the multidisciplinary team committees. We're doing our part with the direction, trying to review indications, trying to select better the patients, and hopefully we're going to have this tool to offer to our patients.
Well, fantastic. No, I appreciate the way you've positioned that. I think it's inspiring for all of us. So at this point of our panel this morning, it's time to sort of wrap it up. And for me to thank Dr. Majumdar and Dr. Amaral for their thoughts and their contributions. I don't think we could have chosen a better, more informed panel for this important conversation this morning. And I do also want to thank them for the strong work that they do every single day to save the lives, as Dr. Majumdar shared their story, and improve the lives of Canadian patients and their families every single day. So to me, this has been inspiring. Thank you very much to our esteemed doctors, much appreciated. I also want to thank the audience for their participation this morning. I want to thank the CNIC for enabling this informative conversation. It's been a great pleasure for me to be a part of that. And at this point, I guess I'll turn it over to Andrew for closing comments.
Thank you very much, Ken. And just to echo your sentiment there, Ken, thank you to our physicians, Dr. Majumdar and Amaral, for your time this morning. Just for everyone's information, if you or someone you know is interested in finding out more about medical isotopes, the work of our great members like Boston Scientific and their Y90 product, I invite you to visit our website at canadianisotopes.ca. This event will also find its way onto that page if anybody missed it to review afterwards. Heading into March, which I can't believe is tomorrow, I also want to take the opportunity to inform everyone who's joining us this morning about the next CNIC event, and it's a big one. On March 29th, in cooperation with the Empire Club, the CNIC will launch its formal Isotopes for Hope campaign with our keynote speaker, James Scognac, who's chair of the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council. We will be revealing a new report with updated market analytics, recommendations for government. So if anybody is interested in finding out more about that event, please contact myself or Melody, whose email is on the website, and there will also be information on our website. So I look forward to joining you all in person for that event. So thank you very much again for your time today. Thank you again to our sponsors of this event, Boston Scientific, as well as, again, our physicians for joining us. And thank you, everyone, for your time, and have a great rest of your Tuesday.